If you knew that the end was near, how would you spend your last and final days? And remarkably, our Parsha and really the book of Devarim as a whole recounts and gives us a small glimpse into this idea as it describes how Moshe spends his final days prior to his death with the Jewish people. And in particular, our Parsha emphasizes that prior to his death, Moshe made a point of designating 3 cities to serve as Arei Miklat, cities of refuge for inadvertent killers. And as you may recall, back in Bamidbar, God had commanded the Jewish people to set aside 6 cities for this purpose, 3 on one side of the Jordan River and 3 on the other. But because Moshe was denied the opportunity to enter into the land and to cross the Jordan, he couldn't prepare all 6 cities. And if you think about it, it's an incredibly strange thing for Moshe to do in this moment. Why would this be one of the last things that Moshe chooses to do in the end of his life? In what way was establishing these cities so important? And amazingly, Chazal, the rabbis, they teach that all 6 cities are actually dependent on one another with regard to their status as Arei Miklat. In other words, the Arei Miklat don't begin to function as cities of refuge until all 6 are formally designated. And in a sense, I think this only strengthens our question. Why would Moshe spend time working on this mitzvah when the cities that he established would not even function for years and years later? And it's precisely for this reason that the Midrash actually lauds Moshe's zeal and his devotion to Hashem and to mitzvos. You see, despite the fact that the cities would not function as Arei Miklat, Moshe nevertheless exerted himself in this endeavor out of his desire to perform as many mitzvos as possible. And Chazal apply to Moshe the proverb of Ohev mitzvos, lo yispa mitzvos, that one who loves mitzvot is not satisfied with mitzvos. Somebody who truly recognizes the worth and the value of each and every mitzvah pursues every mitzvah opportunity that presents itself, even those that he can only partially fulfill. And it's interesting because Moshe is actually not the only great leader of our people who exemplifies this ideal. In fact, the Midrash compares Moshe in this respect to King David, who was denied permission to build the Beis Hamikdash, but nevertheless exerted himself and helped every which way he could to tirelessly prepare for the temple's construction. And as in the case of Moshe, King David knew ahead of time that he would not live to see the final result. And yet in his zeal and in his passion to do God's holy mitzvos, he ensured to complete as much of the mitzvah as he could. Ohev mitzvos, lo yitzpa mitzvos, that mitzvos require zeal and passion is an incredibly important message for all of us. It's a challenge in how we're meant to live our life. And in particular, this coming Shabbat, which is known as Shabbat Nachamu, the Shabbat of consolation and comfort following the destruction of the temple, it marks a 7-week span as we lead up to the high holidays and the new year with Rosh Hashanah. And so what better time for us to really jumpstart and to really think long and hard about our relationship to Hashem and to the mitzvos. Now is the time to jump with enthusiasm, to come to a new class or to work on a new mitzvah, to learn a little bit more Torah. Join us on Zoom as we prepare and do whatever we can to be with each other as we prepare ourselves for Rosh Hashanah. We shouldn't have to think about waiting for those last moments at the end of our days to live our life in the best way that we know that we can and that we should. But it's also interesting to note the stark contrast between the 2 mitzvos which the Midrash discusses. On the one hand, Moshe's involvement in preparing Arei Miklat and King David's work to prepare the temple. And as we all know, the temple was the site of pure sanctity, an idyllic spiritual reality, a place where man encountered the Shekhinah, God's holy presence, in the most direct manner possible. On the other hand, the Arei Miklat, the cities of refuge, they represent an entirely different kind of mitzvah, and namely, that is mitzvos or commandments that relate to the imperfect or maybe the problematic realities of life. When we think of the Arei Miklat and mitzvot like it, we deal not with holy sacrifices or communion with God's divine presence, but rather we focus on more mundane issues of wrongful death, of vengeance, and the safety of a fugitive. The mitzvah of the Mikdash involves the pursuit of lofty spiritual goals on the one hand, whereas the case of Arei Miklat entails the Torah's guidelines for handling the unfortunate circumstances that arise in just day-to-day life. And so perhaps based on this, we can suggest that this midrash is really seeking to emphasize the importance of zeal and fervor in performing both kinds of mitzvos. Some people might instinctively reserve their religious energy, if you will, for the more elemental or down-to-earth aspects of Jewish practice. Maybe they feel intimidated or otherwise unable to relate to a more lofty concept of sanctity or purity or even spirituality. And on the other hand, others might approach Torah observance with the precise opposite mindset. They can show enthusiasm, they can feel passion when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, to this loftier, idyllic concept of holiness, of Kedusha and the like, but they find themselves simply unable to relate to the Torah's practical guidelines for normal, everyday life as a religious calling and a means of serving the Creator. In their mind, Avodat Hashem is simply restricted to the sacred realm, and it is just separate, it's apart from the mundane realities of life. But the Midrash teaches us that we must follow both models of zeal and enthusiasm. It challenges us to follow examples set out by both Moshe and by David HaMelech. And so as we transition from Tisha B'Av, a day in which we together mourned and prayed over the destruction and the calamities of our people, to this Shabbat of Nachama, of Shabbat Nachamu, which begins this countdown to the high holidays, let us follow both of these models such that we approach every single mitzvah opportunity with conviction and love, and with an appreciation of the immeasurable value of each and every mitzvah that we perform. And so Orit and Shaya and Nava and Noam, they join me in wishing you and your families a Shabbat Shalom, a peaceful and a restful Shabbat.